Hello, this is Dr. Grande. I'm making this video on January 24, 2022. Today at 5:06 p.m., not that anyone was looking, my channel reached 1 million subscribers. I am incredibly grateful. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing ride. I remember when I reached 100,000 subscribers, I didn't really even think a million was a possibility for me. I didn't even consider that as one of the options, someday the channel will reach 1 million. But it has. That's where I am today. And this, again, has just been an amazing ride, something I never would have expected. When I was younger and in school, making a living as a content creator or social media influencer wasn't even something you could select. That wasn't even a career choice that was available. And yet, here I am. This is what I do for a living. As I pass this 1 million subscriber milestone, I'm also getting ready to pass another one. I'll be turning 50 in just a few weeks on February 15, 2022. So I thought that for this 1 million subscriber video, I would review 5 things I've learned in 50 years. And of course, many of these things I learned while doing this, while preparing these videos and recording them. Now, some may argue that I've learned more than 5 things in 50 years, perhaps even 6 or 7 different items that could be useful. But I'm just going to list 5 so I can keep this video length as reasonable. So these 5 items are not in any particular order. These are just things that I thought would be interesting to review and analyze here in this video. They're not ranked by importance or anything like that. Item number 1 is the idea that people change. This is something I've seen many times in my career as a mental health counselor. There is this strong desire for people to change other people, and often themselves as well. But these are completely different processes. Someone can change themselves, but they really can't change someone else. I think for relationships in particular, like romantic relationships and long-term friendships, a lot of people look at those situations and say it would really be ideal if I could change and the other person could change. If they could work in tandem to fix problems in the relationship, to have a better future, to argue less, to manage money better, to pick the same movies to go watch, I don't know, whatever it is they want to do. They want to kind of get things in sync. A lot of times it really is about eliminating destructive behaviors, like reducing drug and alcohol use, not yelling, not fighting, things like that. The reality is that people really don't change quickly, and sometimes they don't change at all. A person can decide for themselves to change. They can say, okay, I'm going to make a change based on punishment, reward, whatever motivates them. But the idea that one person can will another person to change or convince them to change or pressure them to change, a person can pressure another person to change, but it probably won't result in really true lasting change, like change based on one's personality. Rather, short-term change, like fear of punishment or looking forward to reward. You can offer somebody a reward to change a behavior, but that's not changing the essence of who they are. So I think that getting along with people and being successful and productive in that arena has more to do with accepting that people won't change as opposed to changing people. I guess also it's about selection, right? Picking people to interact with who are the way that you need them to be for whatever the situation is. Whether it's a romantic partner, or a friend, or some other relationship where you have some choice in who you can be with, that really makes more sense. Just to kind of measure twice and cut once, right? To pick the right people, rather than to select a person and hope that they can change. Now, over the long run, people do change and can change when other people try to pressure them. In the long game, if you want to stay with somebody for 20 or 30 years, then that change could appreciate over time. But it's not going to be at the pace that people are happy with, and it might not be in the direction that people are happy with. Over time, people tend to get more conscientious. So as people grow older, they're less impulsive, less reckless, they have a better work ethic, they show up to work on time more often, things like that. Sometimes that can be misinterpreted as the person responding to demands to change. That change is just natural. Conscientiousness will naturally increase over time. Moving to the second item on the list, this is work ethic. Work ethic affects life in a major way, right? Because people work for money, and money buys things. Money can bring rewards to somebody and help them to avoid pain and things like that. It can make life more comfortable. A good work ethic is one of the best predictors of success, but it's also one of the hardest components to put in place for some people. Some people kind of approach work like it's just terrible and something they have to do, like a necessary evil, as opposed to something that they want to do or enjoy doing. It's difficult with that mindset to develop a work ethic that will lead to success. Now, there are other ways to compensate for a decreased work ethic, like intelligence and creativity, but work ethic is like a restriction on how much those traits can express. Kind of like thinking about like a funnel. Work ethic is the narrow part of the funnel. There's only so much that you can shove through that narrow opening in a certain amount of time. So if work ethic is low, then again, intelligence and creativity don't get to be expressed to the maximum. Just like personality traits, work ethic is difficult to change. It's difficult to change it in somebody else. That's actually quite difficult. And it can be difficult for a person to change it for themselves. I think the key here also moves back to kind of acceptance and selection. So some people are very motivated to complete certain tasks, but not others. So the key would be to find work where the motivation level is high, right? Just, again, picking the right career. Just like somebody may pick the right people to interact with, they may pick the right career so that they can have a work ethic that's where they want to be. Acceptance makes more sense in many situations than trying to change something that's not going to change quickly. Having said that, I think that work ethic can change faster than many personality characteristics if behaviors are put in place every day to reinforce a positive work ethic, like trying to set certain productivity goals for each day and really working hard to meet that, even if that means working a little late, working a little harder, but just trying to not let that slip on a particular day. There'll always be days where productivity is lower, but just with that mindset of, I'll make this a daily routine, that can be helpful. Habits that are engaged in daily can become much stronger. This goes for both good and bad behavior. Item number 3 is the effect of narcissism. I've talked about narcissism in many videos I've made. I have videos that are really just specifically about narcissism in kind of general situations. And other videos I've covered, like on true crime topics, it's narcissism in more specific scenarios that occurred in real life. The lessons are really the same regardless of the format. Narcissism is a tragedy. It occurs because somebody's trying to protect themselves. It's really kind of out of conscious awareness. I guess one could argue that for the person who is narcissistic, narcissism is temporarily good for them because it protects them from something even worse potentially, like shame. But for the rest of society, narcissism is destructive. And of course, even for the narcissist, it never works out well in the long run. So this is really a mental health issue that is expansive and extremely destructive. I think the theme of acceptance comes in here once again. Narcissism is a tragedy, and it's better to accept that that is true than always kind of fighting against it and hoping to change people. So the acceptance theme really has utility across a few different areas, although narcissism really is a personality trait. So it's a combination of certain personality characteristics. So really this is kind of just another version of the people don't change item that I talked about. The lesson as far as dealing with narcissism wouldn't necessarily be to avoid all narcissists, because that's not possible. They're everywhere. There are millions of them, probably hundreds of millions of them. So trying to move through that minefield successfully would be very difficult. The key is to avoid interactions with narcissists in power when possible, right? So if a person is in a romantic relationship with a narcissist, that narcissist has power, that's a destructive dynamic. If somebody is working in some environment and their supervisor is narcissistic, that's a tragedy. That's really bad news. The job may be great, but the fact that there's a narcissist there is really problematic. And rather than downplaying how terrible that is, I think it's better to accept it and to find a way to get out of the narcissist's control, to get away from their sphere of influence. Sometimes that means quitting a job, finding another job. Sometimes that means complaining, although often that just leads to problems for the person complaining. It's kind of a no-win scenario. I guess one could argue that people who complain in work environments against narcissistic supervisors are kind of helping everyone else, because even though companies usually push them out or fire them, it still puts kind of a demerit on the record of the narcissist. And eventually companies will address that, right? There's only so many people they're going to have complain and not act against a narcissist. The reality is that senior leadership at many organizations simply do not have the skills to recognize narcissism. So they allow these narcissists to rise up, and that hurts everyone else. Also, sometimes senior leadership are narcissistic themselves, right? So they are arrogant, condescending, grandiose, vindictive. They don't view the other narcissist necessarily as a problem unless that narcissist challenges them. So it becomes this dynamic where an employee doesn't have many moves they can make. So again, when kind of looking at the overarching theme, dealing with narcissism often is about avoiding situations where narcissists have power. It's a simple solution that I think brings up a lot of uncomfortable avenues, like leaving a relationship or leaving a job. Item number 4 is about how to stay safe from criminals. This is another area that I cover a lot when I look at the true crime cases. Like I'll talk about what the perpetrators did wrong and their personality characteristics and maybe mental health characteristics. But it's also important to recognize that the victims of crimes sometimes do things that put themselves in a worse situation. That doesn't mean they're responsible. It just means they have a way to minimize risk. And it's usually good to do that. So there's lessons learned on both sides. Staying safe from criminals can be divided into two kind of areas. One would be staying safe from random crime. So this comes down to reasonable safety measures like locking one's doors in a residence or in a vehicle, having a dog, having an alarm system, appropriately and responsibly managing firearms. There's a lot of ways to afford physical protection to a situation. But what about situations where a relationship led to the crime? This is very common. We know that, especially when looking at violence, a lot of victims know their perpetrators, and there is some type of often intense, close or long-term relationship. This relationship gives the potential victim an opportunity to observe the potential perpetrator and look for warning signs. I think that's really the key. The key is to know what the warning signs are and to act on them. I think often what happens is people see the warning signs and they don't want to believe them, right? They don't want to believe that a small lie can lead to larger lies. They don't want to believe that being struck, for instance, can lead to a knife attack or an attack with a gun. They don't want to believe, essentially, that small wrongdoings can ever lead to major wrongdoings. A lot of times they don't, but sometimes they do. And when you consider other factors like the trajectory of the relationship, right? Is it getting more violent? Is it becoming increasingly aggressive? Are there other signs in there as far as personality? Is somebody becoming more fatalistic or more greedy as far as the relationship? Like they'll do anything to hang on to the relationship? Are they destructive when they're separated? Like, is that something that triggers them? So there are many warning signs that can be picked up on. And these warning signs altogether, when they're interpreted, this is really what intuition is. Intuition isn't magic. It's an analysis of a lot of different characteristics at the same time, many different levels and types of characteristics. The way someone moves, what someone says, their mood, like all these different types of characteristics are factored in this equation. So essentially, staying safe is often about trusting intuition, right? That's something I think that's there to help people. And when people ignore those warning lights, so to speak, like they see them on their dashboard and they're like, yeah, I'm not worried about that. That's not conducive to staying safe. That's taking unnecessary risk. The last part I want to mention with this is another thing I see people do that I think isn't always the best idea, and that's weighing good factors against bad factors. Now, this is appropriate for certain decisions, like when buying a car or deciding on a retirement account or something. But when looking at violence, no number of good characteristics can outweigh murder, for instance. Like if a person is evaluating a potential romantic partner and they're like, well, they have a lot of good features. They're always on time, they're attractive, they select nice clothes. Those are on the good side. And on the bad side, they're homicidal. There's no number of factors on that good side that can be weighed against something like homicidal. So there's not really a compensatory model there available, a cost-benefit model. It's more like the negative aspects have to be evaluated alone without consideration for any positive characteristics. So is violence acceptable? Is verbal aggression acceptable? Alone, like not weighing anything else. That's the decision that really has to be made. And often, I think when looking at the negative factors in isolation, it becomes kind of clear what the most prudent course of action is as far as maintaining that relationship or expanding on it. Even though it sounds kind of mean, when a relationship does have to be ended and there is the potential of aggression, sometimes it's better to do it without warning, because the moment of breaking up is a trigger for violence sometimes. So kind of surprising somebody with that and having support available can actually reduce the risk. Again, it sounds kind of mean because it doesn't seem like a polite way to end the relationship, but it does make more sense as far as risk to let that be a surprise, to execute that plan without the other person knowing. This takes me to the last item number 5. Here I want to look at how to select a effective mental health clinician, whether it be a counselor or some other type of psychotherapist. This is a question I've seen many times. I think a lot of people struggle with finding a clinician that they feel is appropriate for them. So how does somebody find an effective therapist? Here are my thoughts on this. I'll look at this as far as positive signs to look for and negative signs to look for. So indicators that are associated with a positive experience and indicators that I think are associated with a negative experience, or at least there's a greater risk of that. Looking at the positive side, I think a license to practice is important. I know there are many situations where a license may not be required, like there could be some institutional level license or somebody could be an intern or something like that. But, to answer the question, like to find the best therapist, I would have to say that licensure is strongly associated with competency. I know that people in unusual states of licensure tend to make a lot of stories, like they'll be asked, do you have a license? And they'll say, well, I don't technically. That's all I need to know right there. Not technically having a license means not having a license. So I don't think this is an area where a lot of excuses should be considered. If they have a license, good. If they don't, that's not ideal. So I think that is an important sign. Next positive sign would be a master's degree or higher. It's like a master's degree or a PhD. There are some situations where people can practice at lower levels of education, but there's just so much to mental health counseling. There's so much to know and so many areas of concern, like areas of caution where a counselor has to know not to wander into those different areas, that I really wouldn't feel safe with less than a master's degree. Experience is also a sign to look for. More than 5 years is ideal. It also has to be the right type of experience, like working with clients one-on-one, helping them to resolve mental health issues, and not some other type of experience that they're trying to carry over and say, well, this was really mental health related. This is something I see a lot too. You'll see people claiming all this experience on a resume when it really had nothing to do with actual mental health counseling. Like they might have done case management, which can be related, but that really can't count as far as saying, I have over 5 years experience counseling. If it's case management, that is something different. As far as what the therapist is like sitting down with them and talking with them, I think a positive sign is when a therapist is curious. When they really want to know what's going on with you, and it's coming from a genuine place of intellectual curiosity. Not, I have all the answers, not, I'm the expert, but rather, I'm very interested in what's going on. Can you tell me more about that? Curiosity leads to the therapist learning the information they need to know to help people. The last positive sign I'll talk about here is flexibility. It's important that a therapist have flexible thinking. They have to be willing to change their mind. So if someone goes to see a therapist and that therapist thinks to themselves, okay, I think this person has persistent depressive disorder, they have to be open to the idea that they're wrong. And later on, they might change it to something like bipolar disorder or adjustment disorder or substance use. Being married to the first diagnosis is not a good sign. Flexible thinking helps everybody. It helps the client, and that's, of course, what's most important, but it also helps the therapist to have a productive and fulfilling career. As far as the negative signs, one that really stands out to me is a clinician who is not organized in an area where they are trying to help their clients. Like, for instance, many, at least a fair number, of mental health counselors and other related professionals are not good with money. So when they give financial advice, it makes me kind of cringe. Like, they're not the people to be doing that unless they know what they're doing in that area themselves. If they manage their money well, then that's one indication that they can offer advice to somebody else. If they struggle with impulsivity and they're trying to help a client to be less impulsive, that's not a good matchup. I think it's important that the counselor kind of have their act together, at least in the areas where they are trying to help somebody else. It doesn't mean they have to be perfect with that area. Like in the area of money, they don't have to be the wealthiest counselor ever, but they just need to be relatively organized in that domain. If they haven't figured out how to manage or organize that area, they're going to be biased as far as advice. They're going to be giving advice from their own personal experience instead of from the scientific literature. Other negative signs would be a therapist who comes up with answers too quickly, always uses the same set of diagnoses or just one diagnosis, and offers the same treatment to every client. So here we don't see a lot of individual type behavior. They're just using a blanket method to cover everybody. That's not consistent with using critical thinking skills. That's kind of a lazy way out, and it's rarely productive. The therapist has to create a plan that is unique to each client. The last negative sign I'll cover here is when a therapist is sensitive to being challenged. I think this is actually probably one of the worst signs. It kind of speaks to that flexibility of thinking, but also to potential narcissism. We see this a lot with mental health professionals, where they don't want to be challenged about their conceptualization of a case. They're the expert, they're right all the time, and that's it. But that's not true, right? The counselor is supposed to be learning along with the client. So if a client challenges a counselor, whether the client is right or not, the counselor really has to be able to take that criticism in the way it was offered and be helpful and productive moving forward instead of getting defensive. A defensive counselor is not an effective counselor. Now, as far as the professions of psychotherapists, I don't really see much difference as far as the effectiveness. Like if somebody wants to go to a mental health counselor, that's great. I'm obviously biased toward that profession as I'm a counselor educator, but I think that marriage and family therapists, social workers, psychologists, and other disciplines do a good job too. I think it's really about the quality of the individual as opposed to the particular profession they selected. All these psychotherapy professions are largely similar. There are some differences in like areas of emphasis, but a therapist from any of those professions can be very good. So again, it's really about looking at the individual. So those are the 5 things I want to review, 5 things that I've learned in 50 years and have learned from creating videos. As far as moving forward, I intend to keep working as long as I can. I really enjoy doing this. There will always be other activities that I do along with creating videos, like writing books and doing consultations and things like that. But I intend to keep working at this at essentially the same level. I think that after the pandemic ends, which who knows when that is, I will probably cut back to 5 videos a week instead of doing 7. I've said that many times though, like I've made those plans many times and never followed through, so I don't know if I will or not, but I imagine someday, I'll have to move back to 5 and then probably even to 3 a week at some point, but I would hope that's pretty far off. I think that I would be pretty bored if I was producing less than 5 videos a week. But I'm always open to kind of changing the plan and doing something creative and new and changing some type of style. I don't tend to do that quickly, right? I tend to look at it more like an experiment, like you change one thing and see what happens rather than radically changing everything. But I am open to the idea of kind of progressing, and who knows what type of strategy will make sense or technology will make sense. So again, I'm always open to things changing in the future. I try to be flexible with my thinking. But as far as the immediate, again, I intend to keep producing videos. I really like doing this. I'm so grateful for your support and encouragement over all these years. It really is incredibly gratifying. This has been a tremendous experience. I'm so glad that you've been with me on this road, and I hope that we can keep traveling this road together for quite some time. Again, thank you so much for your support. It really does mean the world to me. I'll talk to you soon.